Good morning. First off, my name is Mike Kirchner. I'm an assistant professor of organizational leadership at Purdue University, Fort Wayne. It's great to see a number of you joining us this morning. For a lot of you, I can imagine it's very early morning still. But this is a topic that I think is drawing attention because many of us are reflecting on our own experiences of the first day. And I know for myself, as I start making that walk across campus on the first day, I'm pretty excited, a little bit jittery and anxious. And it's when I hit the classroom and walk through the door and start looking around at some deflated faces and faces that don't resonate that same level of excitement that I have, that I recognize maybe we've got to do something here. And so our discussion is set up today where we're going to provide a little bit of background on what do we mean by student engagement, what are some of those strengths and corresponding challenges that we experience, especially on the first day of class, before getting into our top 5 lists, at least the strategies that we've used and have seen successfully implemented that have had a longer term impact on courses for the duration of the semester. At that point, we want to open it up for discussion because we recognize while we're the ones that put together this proposal, we are not the experts on this. We haven't necessarily gone through training on how to create a very engaging first class period before finishing up with a short discussion about some of those other strategies that we've identified that can be useful for identifying additional engagement opportunities. I've already introduced myself. We've got a great team of presenters who, would you all mind just doing a brief introduction of yourself, your role, and within the department or your career right now, and then we'll go on from there.
Yeah, I can start. So I'm Faith Stahl. I just graduated from PFW, the organizational leadership department. I was a TA for Mike and Stephanie, and then a research assistant as well. Currently, now that I've graduated, I'll be transitioning into a new role where I'm an innovation fellow in the South Bend area.
Katie?
I can go next. My name is Katie Holloway, and I also just graduated from the organizational leadership program with my master's. I was a TA for Gordon this past semester, and I am currently a human resources director at a retirement community here in Bluffton, Indiana.
My name is Stephanie Van Dellen. I'm a visiting assistant professor at Purdue Fort Wayne in the OL department.
Ben Schmidt, department chair, organizational leadership at Purdue Fort Wayne, program chair.
Hi, I'm Ellen Dove, and I am a continuing lecturer for organizational leadership at Purdue Fort Wayne.
Okay, thank you all. So we're not going to share our screen for the entire session here, but we've got a few slides that we'd like to share with you all.
Just do it. I'm turning that audio off.
Going back to how we introduced the session, I also think about my first day of class as a college student and how often that first day was viewed as almost a blow-off day, where half the students would skip the first class because they knew all that was going to occur was talking about what's in the syllabus. In fact, I can distinctly remember instances where we would read verbatim what's in the syllabus and be told that the course or the textbook is required before being released for the day. And just remembering the deflated feeling I experienced in that and how that really did set the tone for the rest of the semester. And we think that we have a tremendous opportunity to set the tone for the entire semester based on what do we do in that first 50 minutes or hour and 50 minutes of meeting these students and connecting with them. And so we did put together these experiences that we've had that we're looking forward to sharing with you. But first, I'd like to hand it off to Faith, who's going to get into some of those benefits and challenges that we've identified.
Faith, I think you're muted.
Let me restart. So I didn't get too far, but essentially what we don't have a slide for this, but there is just a brief history we wanted to cover and really hit on the fact that setting the tone in the first class can really have direct impacts on the future class meetings and even potentially the entire semester. So importantly, there are a lot of strategies out there. There is a wealth of information and history on student engagement. This is not a new term by any means, and mid to late 1900s started gaining more and more prominence, and a ton of definitions out there as to what it is and isn't. For our purposes, student engagement is really when students put forth energy, interest, and investment into learning, in particular to the course that we're teaching or looking at. So even in late 1990s, this really became a buzzword because of retention rates being so low and dropout rates being really high in colleges. So it's really, student engagement is used as a big indicator or benchmark or measure as to how we're doing in our class. Is there classroom success? So are students coming to class even? Are they excited to be there? Are they participating? Are they being active? Can you tell that they are actually taking in the information that we're teaching? So these are all things that we try to consider, and the variety of tactics, even broadly speaking, that student engagement encapsulates. So specifically, student engagement can be formal or informal. So if we set the right tone in the beginning of the semester, we can really have engagement happening more organically, more naturally, to where we don't have to necessarily schedule activities out of our time in the class. It'll just happen naturally, where participation is just generally accepted. Further, student engagement can really be something that's either long-term or short-term. So there can be temporary activities that have a time start and a time end. So we think about those icebreakers, those first 20 questions that we really do that maybe last 15 to 20 minutes, but the intent is to really get that connection going, get people knowing who their peers are, and importantly, knowing who their instructor is, that exchange of information. And then more long-term options can be flipped classrooms, seminar setups, where we're really challenging the students to be in charge of their learning, come prepared, and to take a more active role in that process. And then, of course, there's all these different components that go into student engagement. We can think of behavioral components about that actual physical participation and involvement, whether it's raising your hand to ask a question. We can think of emotional components where we are looking at attitudes of the course and the content we're providing. And then we can also look at cognitive components of that, so thoughtfulness and willingness to learn. So in short, what I'm segueing into and what you can see are these benefits and challenges of student engagements. There's obviously better approaches than others, and we're going to cover past these benefits and challenges, what exactly that looks like for us personally, what strategies we've taken away. But we recognize that that doesn't come, as first, it's not, second nature to exhibit these student engagement tactics or to employ them expertly. There's a lot of challenges, which I'll start with on this slide because I want to end on a more positive note with benefits. I'd rather do that than end with challenges before we move forward. But there are a lot of challenges that come with not only garnering student engagement from the start, but really maintaining a high engagement and consequently avoiding that boredom. So this requires a lot of student and instructor participation. It requires a lot of creativity to make sure that we are constantly keeping things going with participation. We're constantly feeling engaged. And fundamentally, this starts with instructors. So we have to make sure that we're engaged first before we can expect it to happen with students. Of course, the students, we have to play our own role as well to make sure that there is that give and take, but it requires really a lot of intention and a lot of collaboration from both parties for it to work out and to be maintained throughout a semester for sure. And then we think about this recent shift to online courses. So that's a big change there. And I don't know that anybody is fully sure what this fall is going to look like, but it's something that we've already had to start preparing for even in this spring. So considering how can we do group work? Because I've done online classes before where group work is really hard to get engagement. There's inevitably a person or two that's hard to get a hold of, a person or two that's maybe just kind of sliding by in the class because there's not that proximity, there's not that face-to-face interaction that's going on. So this is a challenge that we're going to have to continue to progress with, and we'll provide some ideas for later on in this slideshow. But when we talk about benefits, the benefits definitely do outweigh the challenges that we have currently. So if we can garner student engagement from the start and really keep it going throughout, there's an opportunity for that collaboration and for a welcoming environment where students, we feel like we can share our opinions, our thoughts, and really engage in that deep learning that's going to provide grade improvement, some higher learning outcomes, and going to increase satisfaction and motivation with the course, because there is that deep involvement going on. And when we can share our thoughts and feel like this is a space that accepts that and respects that, it really can influence the overall takeaway of our experience with that semester, with that course, with that instructor. And that's even been reflected in semester evals for sure.
Okay, so we came up with some top strategies for student engagement. The first one being allowing students to set ground rules and expectations for the class that they're in. And by doing this and allowing them to participate in the setting of ground rules, you're demonstrating that you value their input and also have a level of trust and respect for the students. Also by doing this, you're kind of allowing them to kind of put themselves in charge of the environment. And so if someone maybe isn't following the ground rules that they set, it's easier to correct those behaviors, because if those ground rules were important enough for them to make them a ground rule on their own, then it needs to be followed by those students as well. Secondly, center a group discussion around central course themes. So professors and textbooks are a great source of learning, but so are other students' experiences. And if students are able to engage in small group discussions about subject matters, other students may be able to see the perspective a little differently than what maybe an outdated textbook is telling them. And it also kind of helps them tie it into their own lives better, which then brings us to the next point of allowing students to collaborate and identify at least 5 reasons why the course is relevant to their personal and professional lives and why the course may help in their careers. I think almost everyone here has taken a course where you are sitting there asking yourself, why does this matter to me? Why am I taking a geometry class whenever I am going into leadership or into human resources, for example? How does this tie in together? But if you're able to allow your students to kind of collaborate and learn from each other and see how this class that may not have any immediate correlation that you can easily pinpoint, it helps them in the long run by being able to then see that, okay, this will benefit me down the road. And with that, it helps create a sense of community by sharing a passion for the course and the experiences on the subject matter. So professors have the ability to make topics exciting and to ignite the passion for topics within the students, but they also have the ability to cause death by PowerPoint and to just totally suck the life out of the class in a way. And if the professor is clearly not interested within the coursework that's being displayed, their students aren't going to be either. However, if the professors walk in and they are super excited about what's being discussed and talked about, and the students see how it's relevant in their personal lives, then that class is going to share a bond that is probably going to run pretty deep, and that again will just help them in their learning.
Opal had asked a question about an example of a ground rule or expectation. And what I've done in the past is actually asked a student to volunteer to come up to the front of the class, and we break it off with basically 2 different sets of questions where the students will identify and come up with a list of items where expectations that they have of me or of the course. What have they seen in the past that has made a course successful or effective to something that they found beneficial. And then they come up with an alternative list of ground rules that they set for each other or expectations they have of each other that will impact the likelihood of that course being a success. And we work through that discussion for roughly 10 to 15 minutes on either question. And then we get into a discussion of, okay, let's narrow it down to the top 5 that are most important. And I try to stay out of the conversation as much as I can and have a student or 2 students up at the front of the classroom leading that discussion. And inevitably, the ground rules are almost always identical, or they're very, very close. But it's this empowerment of creating this sense of feeling like ownership in the classroom that really seems to make that impact there.
So I'll get into a little bit of this from the online aspect in terms of engagement. So one thing that I think is important is really starting the class off with meaningful discussion boards, stimulating questions, and the instructor being involved very early in the discussion board or what we're doing. So one thing that I do is we do a sort of a get to know each other type thread. Everybody is supposed to answer a question related to what they want to learn from the course or an example related to the course. And I go ahead and I respond to every single one of those posts. I encourage other students to do that. And the idea is for people to start to get to know each other, to start to set that expectation as we go pretty early. And so I think it's important not that the first week of your online class or the first day is just reading the syllabus or looking at a few things, that it really is a discussion and setting the tone for what we have. Because of course, your first day of the online course might be Monday, or for some people it might be Tuesday, or it might be 3 minutes before the deadline of the first assignment. Whatever that might be is going to have an impact on when they start, but having something to get into right away. And that's the second part here, engagement online, is this idea of an opening video setting the tone. So I've got videos that talk about first what the class generally is about, why I'm excited about it, that type of thing. But I also have videos related to this is how the class is going to flow forward and this is the expectations. So what's the discussion board like? What does it do? All of that is kind of to set that opening expectation. And generally I do videos of 5 minutes, about 5 minutes or less as well, but to try to set the tone of what things are like and how we're going to go forward in the class really up at the front. So having an initial folder that says this is when we start, this is what this class is about, before you get into content even, is something that I do. I think that gets us through the engagement top strategies.
Yeah, Carlos asked, to what extent do ground rules imply a change of rules to the syllabus, or do these ground rules become part of the syllabus? I haven't actually made any change to the syllabus based on the ground rules. What we do with those is I'll actually take a picture, post those on our Blackboard page, or we're now using Brightspace, but whatever learning management system we're using, I'll share them there. And then at the midway point, we do a revisit of the ground rules. How are we doing? Are we upholding expectations that we set for each other? It's obviously a little bit uncomfortable having students tell you, these are my expectations of you. But at the end of the day, there isn't any surprises in that. We'd like grading done in a reasonable amount of time. If we send an email, we'd like a response within a reasonable amount of time, and then we have a discussion. What is a reasonable amount of time? Is it 48 hours, 72 hours? And more often than not, it's far more time than I actually need. But it encourages that reflection on, we're all balancing many roles and responsibilities, and it just helps with those shared expectations. But that does take us to our open discussion here, where we would like to open it up for discussion. and to hear your thoughts on what are things that you've done in the past to stimulate engagement on the first day. I don't know that we necessarily planned on a group this large. Maybe in this sense, it would have made sense to do breakouts, but this will at least give us an opportunity to ensure we don't miss out on anybody. And as the conversation goes, if we don't get everything covered, at least we can get some suggestions or ideas in the chat board, and we can try to keep track of those as well.
Michael, I'd like to just, I'll raise my hand just so everybody knows. My name's Emilio Lopez, and I'm based out of Dallas. I teach at the Dallas College, the new Dallas College, formerly the Dallas County Community College. I have adopted now for several years, about 4 or 5 years now, the use of GroupMe to build that sense of community, number 4 on your list. And the students absolutely love it. There are some who are reluctant to get on it because they're already on so many social media sites and all this kind of thing. But they understand the value of it, the fact that especially now in this online setting, but I do it when we were in a face-to-face setting as well. They can post questions about an assignment. They can post questions about when something's due or about what an assignment is about. They can post, whatever they want about the class. If some of them own a business, I encourage them to post about their business. If they want to do a promotion about their business, I encourage them to do that there as well, because they have a captive audience and they're able to do that. So they're building that sense of community amongst themselves, and it lightens the load on me. Instead of me having to answer 10 emails about the same topic, they're able to answer each other about that topic, and I'm there in the background following along, and if they go off track, I'll bring them back in alignment. But if they're answering the questions and they're moving along well, I just let them go, and I pat them on the back and I say, hey, great job, guys, way to support each other. And they move on, and it's been a great tool for me and my group.
I'd never thought of using GroupMe, but that's actually really brilliant. I think sometimes they want us to interact with students on Twitter or other social media platforms, but that idea that you could quickly answer, or they can answer each other's questions, is really great. So thank you, Emilio, for offering that.
Yeah, thank you. The amount of different communication outlets students have today that it just blows my mind, and GroupMe is just one I've gotten on within the last year, and yeah, it's incredible how effective it really is, and any opportunity to use technology with students, it creates a good learning environment, I think.
And I like it because I don't have to be the one to post reminders. I encourage the students to remind one another, to be accountable to one another about those assignments. I've done my job by posting it on the LMS calendar, right? By posting those assignments already. They're on the calendar. They sign on to the LMS, it's there. That's the first thing they see. Now it's up to them to remind one another about those assignments, and I make it their responsibility to do that.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Wanda Tisby-Kuzar. I currently am employed in the online education industry for Producio Corporation. We were recently acquisitioned, so that was an interesting endeavor. And we also had to go through onboarding all over again. But aside from that, on the first day of class, before the first day of class, I typically send my welcome announcement to both student, university, and their personal emails, along with posting on the platform. I also message, the platform I'm working in is called Virtual Campus. So we have something called a C2U Messenger. And because I work with students in capstone courses and graduate studies, which is under the umbrella of graduate studies, our students tend to work a lot. So when I send that 30-minute message prior to the session beginning, because we do live chats, I tend to get a really good turnout. And I try to make it as marketable as possible. I try to put information in there, or what would be the highlights, and then I end with something that lets them know we're going to have a Q&A. And if they're not familiar with the new platform, because a lot of our students in the master's program may be coming from other universities and they're not familiar with virtual campus, I have a little segment in there to make them familiar with the basics and an opportunity to ask questions. And if I have to share my screen, if someone asks, we do that. And if the session has to go over an hour, I do that too, because sometimes it does.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Kim, you had shared using self-deprecating stories. Can you elaborate on that and why there's benefits to student engagement?
Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, all right, we hear you, okay. Yeah, so I had actually read a leadership article, like some of the best habits. It was a big survey. And one of them said that followers appreciate self-deprecating humor when the leader uses that, because a lot of times there's that, we talked earlier in Faith and Stephanie and Mike's session about, the power differential. And so they always know that I'm the professor, but I like to bring it to a level where they feel comfortable. And I read that self-deprecating stories are often a good way to get your followers to, it humanizes you more. And so, especially the GPA story, students are so hung up on the whole GPA thing. And I tell them, I said, I have my doctorate now from a tier 1 university, and I barely made it out of undergrad. And I'll share with them my second semester, I had a 1.9. And it's so funny, and I get a lot of feedback from them, how much they appreciate me talking about my failures and how bad I was as an undergrad student. And it just really, it makes them feel more comfortable because they're raised under that ridiculous failure's not an option thing, which is, I always tell them, we fail every day. Literally, I fail every day, but I'll share some of my big ones with them and and joke about it and say, I still ended up okay. So, I barely got out of undergrad, but for some reason I did all right everywhere else. So they really appreciate that because it's been hammered in their heads and they believe it. And I also say to them, like, when you go to get your second job, are you going to put your GPA on your resume? And they say, well, no. I'm like, that's exactly right. I said, so let's put that where it belongs. And, so just when I tell them the truth, I never went to class ever. Like I did not go to class unless I had an instructor that wasn't talking from the textbook. Then I'd go because they added, more information. But yeah, no, you would all hate me in class as an undergrad. That just straight out. But I had read about it in theory, and then I put it into practice, and I just find that it's really a great way to get them, just feeling a little bit better about themselves. And knowing that, what their GPA or failing one class or whatever they think is the end of their world is nothing.
I love that. Anything that reduces that power distance there. Kim, you have something?
I do, Mike. Yeah, kind of along Kim's point too, and just hearing her speak made me think of something too that must resonate with my students, because I tend to often see this on my end of the semester evaluations. So whatever it is, it must strike a chord. But I often on that first day of class make it very known that they're going to ask great questions and I will not always have the answer. But that I will work to get the answer for them. But for whatever reason, that seems to resonate. And especially, it's often in one of my intro classes. So I've got freshmen and sophomores in there, and they walk in and maybe that power differential or something, or they just assume I know everything. And I'm very willing to admit that I don't, but I will work to get the answer when I don't. And for some reason, they like to hear that too.
Yeah, that's a great example and demonstrates that we're all in this together.
Right, that's true.
And going back to the discussion about power differentials, how do you all feel about titles and the use of titles? Do you prefer going by doctor or professor or first name basis? Do you even make that clear? Or do you leave it up to students to determine how they address you?
Well, you know, I work with my first online university that I worked with. When we were onboarded, we were asked what we wanted to be called. And what was interesting, they included students, top students in that onboarding. So we kind of agreed on what I would be called. And we came up with Dr. Wanda. So for some reason, it's showing respect, but at the same time, the students are feeling comfortable with that. And I asked them the same thing. What would you like to be called? And we come to an agreement. Some like to be really informal. Some like to be formal. And that seems to work.
Sure. How do you like? I mean, do you have a preference?
I don't have a problem with it. Some students, I have military students, and they're very formal. So they were still going to call me Dr. Kuzar, and I'm fine with that too. And I tell them whatever you're comfortable with, but I do prefer, because I worked hard for the doctorate, that doctorate be in front of that in some form or fashion.
Understandable.
I think that's an interesting point you mentioned about, you know, having a military base as students. And I wanted to just mention, and I've been called different things at different universities. I mean, some universities, they would use Kathy, but I prefer Professor Lovelace or Dr. Lovelace. I mean, you know, if you have the last name Lovelace, you want to make sure you use it. But one of the things I think is interesting, I see a lot of gender differences. So, you know, and as a female, you know, I see that sometimes male students will call me Kathy, but they'll call the male professors Dr. Smith, or, you know, whatever that aspect is. And so for me, that's a huge sensitive issue for me. And I think, you know, I started at the first just saying, you know, I like to be called Professor Lovelace. You know, if we have a lot of classes together, and, you know, later on in your undergraduate career, because we're just undergraduate students, you know, maybe we'll talk, you know, maybe we will be on a first name basis, but I find that even sometimes students who have graduated feel uncomfortable calling me Kathy. They still like to call me Professor Lovelace, and I like that. And like you said, I mean, I like to be called Professor Lovelace, and so, but I think that it's not that I don't mind. I wouldn't care if they called me Kathy, and if they called all the men faculty by their first name, that would be great. I mean, I wouldn't care, but I've noticed time and time again, it's a gender difference. So
I think you're bringing up a great point, Kathy, about the different influences and contexts in which our titles might be appropriate. Being a veteran myself, I'm very familiar with role and hierarchy and respect for authority.
Mm-hmm.
I admit it's one of the reasons I got out was because I was kind of done with it. But every environment is different. And so veteran students, they almost refuse to call me Mike, while others are much more comfortable calling me Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Follow-up question to that, have you seen where that might influence student engagement at all? Especially on the first day of class and how the class proceeds.
I will say that it is kind of always awkward for me, because I feel like I am being a little bit arrogant or something. But my personality is such that, you know, we always have a good time, and I'm very nurturing and such. So I don't feel like after we get going, there's a status difference per se. It's more of a, it's a different thing, but yeah.
I always go in as Dr. Gower. I tell them I'm Dr. Gower because it's one of those things. We have a very narrow funnel, and as we get to know each other and have more fun, because I do love to have a, rolling conversation, whatever, we'll get off topic. And as long as everybody's engaged, I know that they're learning from each other. But I always start with doctor. And I had one class that ended up, it was my second semester at New University, but I'd already had them all the first semester. And they just started calling me KG. And they'd always go, yo, KG. And I let them because they weren't being disrespectful. It was like a term of endearment. And so, I let them roll with that. But I always start as doctor. And I do think the gender thing is huge. I really do.
I've had that happen as well. I'm contracting in cyber security. And I am the person who works with the interns that come from 3 universities. And some of the professors from the other universities are involved. And I notice on Zoom calls, I would be referred to as Wanda, where the male professors are Dr. TJ or Dr. this. And I correct them right then and there. Don't let that go. I would say I prefer Dr. Kuzar or Dr. Wanda. And I think it also sets an example for the females in that industry because females aren't well represented. So when they see that I assert myself to ask for that respect, I'm role modeling for the students as well.
Yeah, that's a really great
I think you all bring valid points. It's important that we don't miss those moments. All of this titles and positioning are very important, but it's also just as important that the students understand that it's situational, right? In a classroom, we can become as familiar as we want. I always tell them that I'm on a first name basis with the chancellor of the community college, or I'm on a first name basis with the president of the college. That's when we're on a one-on-one situation. But when we're in a formal meeting or we're talking, we encounter each other down the hallway, it's Chancellor so-and-so, or it's President so-and-so. It's not, hey, Eddie, how's it going? Right? It's very situational, and that's a lesson I believe that all of us can teach our students. We can be on a first name basis with all of our students if we so choose, right? But if we're at a networking session, if we're in a public setting, it's very important that they understand that there's a time and a place, right, to be that way, and that there's a time and a place not to.
Yeah, that's another great point,
One
Emilio.
thing
And obviously, it gets beyond the classroom.
Hey, Michael.
Exactly.
I don't know. I personally tend to use a different approach. I mean, I ask my students to call me Carlos. For whatever reason, they go with Baldo because I don't know why, honestly. And the reason is that, I mean, I'm coming from the private sector. Before getting to academia, I worked 12 years. And I think the only person that I called sir, it was the CEO of a company. And that was only because it was the big chief. But anybody above me, I usually go, and that's one of the beauties of our culture here in the States. Now, I have to say that when I work with international students, that's a different thing. In fact, I mean, when I work with students from the Middle East, absolutely. I mean, they tend to say sir, doctor. Latin American students, they usually use a lot doctor or Mr., senor, whatever. I mean, it comes. But even as today, I got students that keep referring years graduate pass by as Baldo, simple as that. And I believe that set the tone early into what they will find out later on in their careers, because addressing somebody by a title or not, I said, listen, I mean, yes, I think we all work hard for our degrees. I respect, all the years that each of us put in academia and have the dissertation, and more important, moving the domains on each of us. But I personally believe that for students, it's more a transition part of being with us. So trying to encourage or push the doctor. Now, I have to say in the last 5 years, maybe it's going to be, has been a couple times on which I have to say, careful if you go that route. I am the person with the knowledge in here. And that's usually happen when things turn really bad. But besides that, I tend to use just a low-level intro. This is me. This is Carlos. The doctor is a degree that I got. He's in my office. It's nice. It's in the showroom. Feel free. I'll give you my dissertation. Read it. You're gonna throw it away. But I think it helps. It definitely helps to set the tone low into we're not, we're individuals. We have the same issues that many of them they have. So
I think those are great points, Carlos. Shifting gears a little bit.
It looks like Shane had his hand up. Do we want to get to Shane?
Absolutely.
All right, thanks. I wasn't sure if that was working or not. But yeah, I was just to back on what Carlos and also what Emilio was talking about. It's it's context, it's situational. Some classes have certain student groups in them, and you start talking to them on the first day, and you can tell right away they're just going to call me fudge. I just got to live with it. That's just how it works. And then there are other class groups, and I grew up with the name, so I'm not really worried about it anymore. And then other students almost have to call you doctor, and that's fine. And a friend of mine, we got our doctorates at the more or less the exact same time, and we were joking to each other, now that we have these, are we going to insist that people call us doctor? And we laughed, and we're like, of course not, that's ridiculous. And then the two of us, the very first day, both got called Mr. and Mrs. by someone, and we immediately texted each other, and we're like, man, am I pissed off? I just that was the opportunity to be called the title I worked hard for, and they didn't do it, and I'm angry at them, and I feel weird about being angry about it. But we did work hard at it, as so many people have said. We did work hard at it, but I try and let students find their comfort level when it comes to talking to me. I don't want them to be, especially on the first day, I don't want them to be uncomfortable forcing a title into their mouth right away. So however they have to communicate with me, that's fine. But something that I think, again, related to what Carlos and Emilio were just talking about, situationally and professionally, I always tell them, I will not communicate with you by email or in a written context if you can't professionally address me with the appropriate title. Because guess what? You get in the habit of just saying, yo, fudge, in your email to me, you're going to start saying, yo, whatever your boss's name is, what up, CEO, blank, whatever. I don't accept that. And I tell them on the first day, I literally won't reply to you. I don't care how important your email is. I don't care how important the question is. Yeah, in that context, in written communication, which is that's going to be your professional go-to for the rest of your life, you've got to start getting in the habit of identifying, this is a title, this person has earned it, they have it, I have to use it, I want them to use mine, whatever it ends up being, you get. So we have to get in that habit, in that context. So I really don't let it slide in the written communication form. Orally, when we're interacting in the classroom, I go with the flow and feel out the group behaviorally. I know we all do that. But I found expectation-wise, first day especially, it helped. It helped a lot of them understand how to begin to communicate at the level we expect them to do so professionally.
I think those are all great points, Shane. And I think it sets up William's question regarding how do we stimulate engagement before class even begins? What are we communicating? And I have some thoughts on that. But I admit I've never thought about how does my communication prior to meeting for the first time influence what engagement might look like. William, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to kick us off with?
Sure. I think most of us all would agree that we have to cram a lot into our classes in the first class. If you're not just doing stupid stuff like going over the syllabus, you're trying to take advantage of that time. So I like to try to get away with as much before that as possible in terms of setting expectations and details. And a lot of the things that have come up here, I try to do in that. I try to take a light perspective on how I word it, throw in some jokes, throw in some self-deprecating humor if I can, try to keep it a little bit light so that it, from the very first communication, even before they come to that first class, hopefully I've broken down some of that power distance and get rid of some of the trivial stuff, that, hey, get your textbook on time. Especially, and this is especially true with online, right? It's like, make sure you got your book, look at the syllabus. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time going over it in class. I'll hit some highlights. If you've got any questions, here's what we're gonna do. And emphasize that you need to come, you need to be on time and start doing some of these things we're talking about, but do that before you get to the first day and the first minute of class.
Yeah, I really like that. That's one I'll be thinking about more moving forward is what am I doing to stimulate that engagement before they even ever lay eyes on me?
Yeah, I guess part of our question is, I've not talked with anybody about that. Has anybody seen any downsides or negatives or other ways to do that?
In what context?
Well, in terms of, so I send out an email usually a week to 10 days before the start of class with some of these basic intro things, basic questions, basic pieces of information. And I've never had a problem with it. I mean, you always get some students that don't see it, but that kind of reinforces, hey, you need to pay attention to your messaging, your email, make sure your email is connected. I just like anybody else's thoughts on when to use or how to use or how not to use that communication before the first session of class.
For our online classes at my school, it's mandated you have to have a start date series of email communications with the class before the class actually starts, no matter what the session is. And we get blasted with emails from our online CPS coordinators reminding us to do that. So there's no escaping it. You have to do so. And that's now starting to drift over into our what we call the day student traditional face-to-face campus, because we might never do that again. So it's just simply becoming a policy they're applying to everything.
I do think with the early videos, there can be the early email type setup is what exactly you're telling people. I think sending like a 5-page email that's really detailed to them on the class probably doesn't help as much as like scares people. Or like I could see some of the discussion you have in class, if you've got to be serious and try hard, you word it wrong in an email and it sounds like this class is going to be hell. You should drop now. So I think there's probably some framing where I think if I said it in person, it would be taken better. While if I said it through email, it might seem scary or it might not come through. One thing that happened, I did an email. I've got a class starting today, actually, that's online. And I sent out the email, and then I had students email and be like, I can't get into the class. Is something wrong? Because the class itself didn't open yet, which was kind of unhelpful. So sometimes you could say, we're doing this or that. But if it's too early, they can't get into Blackboard or the Brightspace, and so it's frustrating. So that'd be more of where I think some things can come up is, how are you doing it? What's the tone before the day one that could have an impact?
I saw Sue said the same thing, but I can't stand videos. I'm a book person. Give me a book, I can learn anything. But because of the situation, because of the online classes, I mean, I teach a summer 5-week class, no big deal. 15 weeks that might go online, might not go online, we still don't know anything. I've just started pounding out videos, and I try to make them as funny and laid back as possible. I did one last night with the dog. Part of the time he had his goggles on. I hung a sign around his neck that said day 0, and it was for my first year students. And I said, if you wait until day 1 to get organized, you're behind. So, and I just waved treats in front of the computer. So sometimes I'd say, "Don't you think so, Teddy?" And I'd hold the treat up and down and he'd nod his head. And I mean, it's totally ridiculous, but they're just as scared and uncertain and as worried and as uncomfortable as we are, right? I mean, for me, 15 weeks online is a heck of a lot different class than 5 weeks online. So I've gone to videos and I'll put them on YouTube and let them access them. But I found that to be a lot better way than messaging them. When I send them an email, they don't respond. We do have a way in Canvas or EAB system to text them. When I text them, they always get back to me. But as far as what I can always get them to watch a video versus sending out an email. And that's a part of it they've got to get over. And I tell them that once we get in class because of professional world, but I just try to make I try to make my videos really goofy, and I do all my different virtual Zoom backgrounds and just whatever I can do to kind of get them feeling comfortable, at least with me, and set the tone for the class as face-to-face as possible right now. And I hate videos.
These are all awesome points, and we're down to the last few minutes, but I wanted to give Zeynep an opportunity to share more about that pre-class survey she sends out, because that sounds like a terrific example of how do we stimulate that engagement. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about what that exercise looks like?
Absolutely. I prepared it on Qualtrics so that I can send in time. Mostly I send it just to ask them about what are their expectations in this class? Are there certain weaknesses or strengths that they have, so I understand how to tailor my classes? Particularly, I would spend some time if there's a common theme that they would like to, and I tell them so. This is something that came up and I did some research. I prepared this for you. But particularly this semester, now that everything is fully online and post-COVID and students are isolated and they're psychologically impacted financially and etc. Post-justice movement, I mean, there's so much going on. I was really concerned about how are they feeling? Are they overwhelmed? How can I help them more? How can I support them more? So I added lots of new questions about, these are the 10 things, can you rank order them for me? What would be your priority? Because I can't do everything in one class, but, based on their rank, because I've never spoken to students about, the everything else that's going on within the last month. So before I start, I would like to hear from them. And then on the first day of class, I'll tell them, these are the results. I appreciate your input. I will absolutely design. And I did some changes as such. That's what I do.
That is awesome. And I have to imagine that it starts building some relationships and trust with the students, which at the end of the day, no doubt that in itself is going to make them feel more comfortable and create a more welcoming environment where students are going to be willing to speak up.
I hope so, yeah.
So I'm going to get us back to our slides, as Stephanie's going to take us into some of the other ways in which we've identified are potentially useful in helping us sorry, I'm playing with Zoom. How do I share my screen? In helping us figure out additional ways to identify some other strategies.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I won't take too much time because so many of the things that you've already offered, I had in my notes. And so I'll try to kind of sum up and put these things into our developing ideas. So the first one on here is about considering what has or what would inspire your interest in a course. So when I heard some of you talking about how do I get, it could be awkward, but how do I get students to address me a specific way? And then we had some great suggestions about, using an email that's maybe inappropriately sent. Yo, professor, what are we doing this week? Signed by nobody. And, I had an instructor that did that in my first college course I took. And I remember laughing every class that I was in with Dave Dussault teaching Business 101, because he would use things like that to infuse humor, but then also to say, like, you need to tell me what course you're in. You need to tell me, like, you need to address me properly, and you need to sign your name, right? And those were his expectations. So how can we infuse some humor? Like, who really inspires us? And thinking back and reflecting on that a bit. Another suggestion that's on here is to consider students' current knowledge. So I don't necessarily mean like testing them, but I think the survey idea that came up was a brilliant example. If there's a prereq for your course, meeting with that other instructor to make sure, who maybe regularly teaches that prereq, what they're coming in with. I kind of made this mistake recently on an online course that I taught this summer for graduate students, because I just assumed that it would be all of our graduate students from the OL program, and that some of them had come through our program before as undergraduates too. And so they had already gotten a course on OB, and they had already gotten a course on leadership. And my course was 5 weeks plus a finals week, OB and leadership in one. Yay, lots to do. So yeah, that was true-ish, right? I did have students who had been through our undergraduate program. I did have students from our program, but we're one of the only programs that offers master's courses in the summer. So I had engineers, I had education, I had public policy. You know, I had people, half my class was not from our department. And so it really had to reassess, like, what is the knowledge they're bringing in here? And is my course content appropriate for their level? And for the various levels within the course. We want to consider some strategies that may limit one-way communication. Either maybe we don't want to engage in them, or if we have to, perhaps it's done very specifically for time or other resources that aren't available. Another thing, we want to consider strategies that are really going to encourage student interaction. So one thing that I do here is my first day, typically with the undergraduate students at a lower level. I have them all sit in a circle, because we have a couple classes where there's the chair desks, if you get those, and I sit in the circle with them. And we start with the icebreaker. And sometimes I also do, we have whiteboard walls in a couple of our classrooms too. And so I'll write up on the wall, like, what do you think leadership is? Or define leadership. Or I'll just put the word leadership up there and give them a bunch of markers and let them go crazy. And I'll be very kind and tell them, like, nobody knows your handwriting yet. No one's going to know what you wrote on the board, right? Just go forth, write something, and then let's take a tour around the room and see what we see, put some themes together, start to discuss this. So that's another way that I do, try to get them up and moving. Really, for me, it's tying it back to whatever my teaching philosophy is. So I want my students to engage in a lot of peer-to-peer learning. I want to be more of a facilitator and ask them questions that are going to drive their interest in learning on the subject. And so by sitting with them that first day, even though I'm young and sometimes they don't realize I'm actually the instructor for the course, that is one thing that I do with them to kind of level set and say, you have power and authority in this classroom too, and you bring a unique perspective that needs to be heard. So to give them that kind of space. The last two on here about talking with former students and also talking with colleagues. So former students, you've got your teaching evaluations, but sometimes you're going to teach a student in another course and you can always ask them informally about something if it worked or it didn't. Another way that I talk to current students, similarly to the survey that was discussed prior to class, I do one during the first week. And it's usually after the first in-class activity, icebreaker, get to know you event. And I ask them what they need from me as the instructor to be successful in the course. I ask them why they're interested in the course. I ask them about their hobbies and interests. So if I know I have a lot of student athletes in the course, I'm going to start peppering in more athletic, relatable examples. One of my icebreakers is with candy, and they pick a color of the candy and they have to answer a question. And I ask them, like, what are you binge watching? So that I can use examples from the shows they're watching, right? And showing them that I'm listening to them and I'm taking it, you know, totally into account really helps. And where do we get these ideas from? Talking to our colleagues, coming to Movidus, asking people. So all of those good things. I know we're already over a minute, so I'm going to turn it back over to Mike. Let him have the final word. Thank you for sticking with us.
I don't have anything else interesting to say. You can see we've got these 4 primary takeaways. Going back to how we started the session, where I imagine many of us have had that first class experience where it was solely devoted to talking about the layout of the course and reading through the syllabus and just the long-term impact that can have. I'd like to jump ahead to that 3rd point, and it's incredible to me how every class has its own personality, and regardless of how many times I've taught a course, it just takes 1 or 2 students who are highly engaged or highly talkative to really shift how that course operates and feels, and even impact my own energy going into the class, because I know they're in there and I know they're going to be driving the conversation. But that engagement can grow over time. I've seen that as well, where students become more engaged as the trust builds, as relationships build with their classmates, and getting that start early on seems to be helpful. With that, thank you all on behalf of all of our presenters, and really thank you all for speaking up, for sharing these additional strategies. I wish we had a spreadsheet or something we could insert all of these into, but hopefully we can continue these conversations over the rest of the conference, and hope you enjoyed the session and have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.